Hold up, I ain't trying to stump, man, but the Yeezys jumped over the jump, man. I be in and out of arenas like I'm Scottie Pippen. Left my elbow in the pot, a la Vince Carter.
Bitch, you wasn't with me shooting in the gym?
James Harden with the range on me, nigga, way back. Coach, they won't knock me off my pivot, forget it. Been flowing stupid since Vince Carter was on some through the legs arm and a hoop shit. And you can live through anything if magic made it.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know, now you do.
So Adam Silver did his midseason press conference during the All-Star game, in which he touched base on a bevy of topics from officiating to the 65-game rule being attached to players' contracts, all the way to addressing the G League Ignite. And right now is a very pivotal moment for the NBA. Everything around them, as far as the media landscape, is changing. The television partners are pivoting and consolidating. Meanwhile, they're trying to improve their on-court product for streaming. And while at the same time them tweaking their product for television, the officials have had trouble adjusting on the court and making the proper calls, while at the same time the upcoming generations that are coming up through AAU and Nike camps and just this highlight culture that's festering in the amateur circuit is not producing good enough products to elevate the competition on the NBA court, thus affecting the television product. So Silver, since he's been the commissioner of the league, he's been pivoting and finding new ways of growing the business. And he's done an excellent job thus far. Definitely worth every single penny earned. But you guys check out some of the topics he touched base on, and every once in a while, I'll check in.
I understand why the rule is in place. Is it time to separate the Supermax from the awards?
My answer is I'm not sure. Tim, as you know, a lot of thought went into the 65-game demarcation. Not only was it collectively bargained with the players, but we spent extensive time leading up to collective bargaining, talking to all the various constituencies in the league, most importantly the coaches, the general managers, individual players directly. And as you was built into your question, the notion was we needed to further incentivize players, particularly star players, to play more games. So I'm not ready to say that it isn't working so far. I can tell you that the number of games that players have participated in is up this season, and interestingly enough, injuries are actually down. So
now, interesting the way he answered that question, because the 65-game rule is a team rule that is imposed on the teams, and the owners had voted that in. And with them voting that in, they didn't really have to collectively bargain with the Players Association, because it's a team-based rule. It's not a player-based rule. Interesting way that Adam Silver answered this question, because he's right when he said he spoke to the Players Union about the 65-game rule, but the Players Union really had no say-so on it. They were sort of notified about the 65-game rule, but because it's a team-based rule, it's not a player-based rule, it's a team-based rule. It does not have to be collectively bargained with the players. But even though it's a team-based rule, it affects the superstar players on an individual level, because in order for them to get that Supermax contract, they would have to win those awards that are attached to the 65-game rule. It's an interesting tap dance that's going around, but very important with the framing. And throughout this interview, even though Adam Silver, once again, in my humble opinion, he's done a great job since he's been in the league, but there is this poker face that he does play throughout this interview.
whether that's meaningful data yet, I don't know. I think the right time to take a further look at this rule is at the end of the season, when we see sort of at least have a year under our belt.
And I believe they will take a look at that rule again. That's one thing about Silver. I would say they've been flexible, and an unintended consequence of this rule is kind of forcing guys to play through injury, because the awards, once again, is tied to their earning potential. We see it play out with Joel Embiid. Now he's potentially out for the whole year because he was trying to force himself to get to that 65-game mark. Same thing for Tyrese Halliburton. He came back early, and now that hamstring injury was causing him to be limited to 20 minutes a game just to qualify and try to hit that 65-game mark. So right there, he's risking potential season-ending injury which is something that the league is also trying to avoid. Now, he was also asked about the offensive uptake and some of the coaches concerned about that type of style of play and the effects it had on the game.
Adam, I won't go over all the offensive numbers, but scoring is up considerably over the past decade, more 70-point individual performances in the past 2 years than the previous 40.
Damn, that's kind of crazy. In the past 2 years, more 70-point performances than the last 40? Yeah, these rules have been tweaked a little bit too much on the offensive end, especially when you got guys now that are just pushing off with their off arm. These rules definitely got to be adjusted.
And one NBA coach said that defense was being legislated out of the game. What is your view on the offensive explosion? Is it good for the league? Does it make for a better product? And then is the competition committee looking at anything that might sway a couple rules changes in favor of the defense?
Yeah, Jeff, so first of all, just in terms of the difference from last season to this, we're up approximately 1 point per game, just to be clear. And I want to dispel any notion that the league feels, or that the league office necessarily feels, that high-scoring games in the abstract are good. I think what we want...
They're up 1 point per game. That's because the league doesn't take as many threes as they did the season before. They're actually taking less threes. So all this offensive scoring is really coming off of guys just killing it inside the arc. You see, the floor now is so spaced out. 2-point shots come easier than threes.
Are competitive games. That's what's most important to us, and that's what we hear from our fans as well. I think there's a lot happening here, and I've talked to a lot of coaches and a lot of players about it. I think, first of all, the skill level is off the charts. I think that what we're seeing is now in this league, every player at every position has to be able to shoot the basketball. You're seeing this global pool of talent coming into the league, some of the best athletes in the world who can frankly just shoot the lights out. And I think,
yes, there's definitely a higher pool of talent coming into the league, especially globally. But you also got to look at the style of play. If everyone's spaced out and the center is trying to avoid 3 seconds in the paint, you tend to see why the scoring is up. Guys have so much space to operate in. But one key question is, when will the audience get bored of that type of style of play? The NBA is still a product. This offensive uptake is to tweak the product for television, to make it more enjoyable, more watchable. And we're seeing offensive players get more benefit of the doubt, more freedom of movement, from the way illegal picks are called to the way they allow the offensive players to actually gather their dribble and to take steps. And let's not forget that off arm, they allowed them to push off. So now defenders got to be strong, almost on some OG Anunoby. They got to be like that size, that big of a defender to actually not put their arm on guys and to actually not get pushed off of balance because the offensive players is pushing them off with their off arm.
that's partly what's responsible for the increased scoring. I disagree with people who feel that teams aren't playing defense. I mean, you've been covering for this league a long time. The defensive intensity is there. Defensive players are asked to cover much larger areas of the court than they had to historically. Even this was something Larry Bird was talking about during his interview Friday. So I actually am pleased with the state of the game. Having said that, I know there are some coaches who feel that we've hampered in some ways defensive players' ability to play defense at least the way it used to be played in this league.
And not only that, you kind of hampered the style of play. Different teams used to have different styles. The NBA doesn't want to fall into the box of just kind of being that league where every team has the same style, sort of like boxing. Imagine watching boxing and every boxer has the same style of fighting. We like to see southpaws. We like to see other styles of boxers come in and actually collide. Who has the better style? That's what makes boxing a great sport. And the same thing applies to the NBA. You could see one team play with a faster pace and another team slow it down in the half court, maybe have a skilled big man that slows down everything, or just one team could be much stronger versus a team that's finesse. You used to see different type of styles. And the league doesn't want to fall into the box where everything looks the same. That's the beautiful thing about the league because it's nationwide. So the West Coast teams They may use tech more. They may be more analytical. So you start to see their style of play. And then they go over to the East Coast and you see their style of play. They play more of a slow down pace that's kind of led by their transitional defense. More of that old school, we're going to grind you down in the half court and beat you up throughout 4 quarters. So it used to be interesting to see these two different styles come into play every once in a while. And you tend to see it shine out more through the finals.
In part, that's been very intentional. There was a period of time in this league when people thought that the game had become too physical and we'd taken away some of the aesthetic beauty from the game. I was one of those people who felt that way, in the 90s.
Yes, the NBA does not want to go back to that type of style. In the early 2000s, you got games ending 65 to 75. It just wasn't appealing basketball, especially due to the fact that Michael Jordan had left the league in 98 and the league was kind of searching for a brand new identity. And having these teams with athletic enforcers did not really translate to appealing on television.
Whether or not, there need to be any adjustments now is something that we listen to our coaches, we listen to our players, and the competition committee will continue to consider. And I think one thing I'd say, people think that fans like high-scoring games. I think fans like to see players have that ability to use these extraordinary talents. On the other hand, I think what we hear from fans as well is they like defensive intensity. And I think they want players to be able to play physical defense, but not in a way that it hampers, as I said, offensive players from using their incredible skills. So I'm pleased with where the game is, but it is something we will continue to look at.
That physical defense could really come back into play if the league had less games. When you're talking about an 82-game schedule, it's going to be hard for teams to keep that defensive intensity night in, night out. But as is right now, the league's number one priority is getting the television product good enough to pitch to streaming services to almost double their revenue. And when you look at a quarter of the league's teams struggling on the local RSN business, just Bally's and Diamond Sports filing for bankruptcy, the money's not even guaranteed on a local level for those teams. So the national revenue this time around, that contract is very important to a lot of the smaller markets.
The bundle between the streaming bundle that was announced, I think, recently. Just what was your initial reaction to that? How does it affect the ongoing negotiations that you have?
My initial reaction to it was, I think it's positive to the extent that consumers have more choices, and more choices in the way in which they can receive sports and in which they can receive NBA basketball. Other than that, I don't have a lot more to say because I'm just learning about it.
That was a great poker answer. Adam Silver put on a great poker face. But right now, the league is in an exclusive negotiating window with Turner Sports and ESPN. And within that window, whether they're going to just start the negotiation or they already have started having pre-talks, a lot of movement happened in that small time span. And you got to look at the timing of these announcements. First of all, Amazon, in a way, tried to backdoor the NBA. Instead of doing a deal directly through them, they went to their TV partner, which is Diamond Sports, who runs about 15 local team sports rights within the league. Amazon tried to go into the bankruptcy court and try to bail them out, and even propose as far as to getting rid of the Bally's logo and streaming their product directly on Prime Video. So Amazon right there doesn't really have to necessarily speak to the NBA. They could just speak to the bankruptcy court and present the best options to get the bankruptcy court paid and all the creditors. But the league has one ace in their pocket with that scenario, is that they renegotiated owning all those television rights for those local teams at the end of the year. So they could actually bounce off that deal after 2024. The second monkey wrench that happened during this negotiation window is ESPN, Turner Sports, and Discovery announcing a collaboration app where everything from Big Ten sports, NHL, NBA, and some of the NFL games are all going to get streamed in this one collaboration app. And in a way, Adam Silver and the league has to look at this with a keen eye, because a lot of their leverage going into the negotiation table is these different entities trying to outbid each other to get the league. But what happens when they start collaborating? So things are getting quite interesting heading into these negotiations. As Silver has said multiple times, the television rights is the most important thing the league has on its list to get done. So he put on a good poker face right there, talking about it's good for the fans. It's definitely a great option for the fans, but it's leverage slowly being taken away from the NBA. You see, the NFL doesn't have to worry about that collaboration because they're number one on multiple streaming apps and multiple channels. CBS, NBC, Fox, they're the number one program. They have all the leverage in the world. But for all the smaller leagues, the NHL, the MLS, the NBA, anything that doesn't fall under that NFL logo, their leverage is slowly being taken away through all these collaborations.
Adam, you were with the league when Michael Jordan left the league a quarter century ago, and obviously we're here for LeBron James' 20th All-Star game this year. For a generation, he's sort of been the face of the league, arguably. I know we're not sure how long he's going to play, but at some point, probably in the fairly near future, he will not be around anymore. And I was curious what your thoughts are on sort of what the league will look like after that, and what your thoughts are in terms of sort of replacing him as the face of the league at some point moving forward.
Interesting question, Tim. I would say, first of all, I would never anoint another player to be the next LeBron James, just in the same way when Michael retired. And as you're right, I was part of the league then. That question often came up and said, who's going to be the next Michael Jordan? And I remember at the time, David Stern or others were saying, whoever demonstrates on the court that they should be, that's what's so wonderful about the competition and a league.
Of course, no one could get anointed, but the league should have started their marketing and promotion of other teams and players. It seems like the upcoming crop of new generational players, especially born in the United States, they have not quite yet taken the mantle. Guys like Ja Morant, Zion Williams, and Jason Tatum, they haven't taken the mantle of just being the league's figurehead, even for their generation. But also you add on top of that, the guys that have been making major impact for the past 5-6 years have been international guys. Giannis, Embiid, Jokic. And the league has trouble marketing those players to the American market. Make no mistake about it, the American audience tends to gravitate towards their own. Overseas, you see it play out in the English Premiership, where the audience from those local countries are accustomed to celebrating players not necessarily from their country, like Cristiano Ronaldo, Messi. But within the American market, the American audience is not accustomed to being marketed international stars. That's the conundrum of the league. And it's not ironic that you see all these international players coming in and dominating, is because the league in the past 10 years plus have invested money into developing players overseas. So now we're seeing the results of it. But the conundrum that they're having is that they can't market it to the American audience. But the ace they do have in their pocket is that the international audience is going to eventually grow. And that's how the league in a way could kind of trump themselves over the NFL by having a global audience. But within America alone, ever since Michael Jordan has played, the league's ratings have pretty much stagnated. It receives a little bump every now and then, like the Golden State Warriors and Cleveland Cavaliers finals. But that number still didn't reach the Michael Jordan peak of the NBA Finals audience.
I'd also say I think the league is in fantastic hands. I mean, just look at the All-Stars that we're going to be seeing competing tomorrow night. As I said, from the time that Michael retired to now, look at the magnitude of the pool of international players coming into this league. Look at the amount of basketball that's being played on a global basis. I think it's again, that these new players aren't anointed. They demonstrate to the world, they demonstrate to the league that...
Peep the language. They demonstrate to the world, the players globally. The NBA has already pivoted from being known as an American league to now they're the global league. That's pretty much where their growth is going to come from. Once again, the conundrum is marketing those international stars to the American market, which I believe can work, but it has to work starting with the younger generation and attracting that demo, which right now presents another conundrum. The younger generation does not consume the NBA the same way the previous generations have, but they will be accustomed to accepting the global star.
They deserve to be viewed in that same rare position as players like Michael and Kobe and LeBron and others. So let's just watch the competition. But I'm certain people in this room have their own ideas, looking at some of these young guys, who those players could be. But as I said, the the level of basketball, and even you talk to some of the greats from the past will say it's remarkable to watch what these guys now physically are able to do on the floor.
The talent in the league is definitely remarkable, but some of these younger players are going to have to want to take the mantle because the new generation of players are pretty much introverted, as a lot of people in their generation are. So the way LeBron James opened himself up to social media and taking in all those criticisms, the younger generation that grew up on social media, they do not want that same type of heat. They actually will go in and look at the negative comments. So Adam Silver may have a little bit of difficulty of getting guys like Tatum, Zion Williams to put themselves out more, display more personality. And he's got to get Ja Morant to correct his behavior because Ja was already the key. He already had all the tools on the court and off the court, especially pertaining to social media, but he fucked all that up. But when it comes to marketing, they really got to start laying off of LeBron James because at this point, nobody's going to believe a 40-year-old guy is going to lead a team to an NBA championship. The Lakers have been hovering over 500 for the last 3 to 4 years. It took a 2020 pandemic for LeBron to get plenty of rest and make his run in the finals. But other than that, LeBron James has not really been relevant when it comes to the NBA championship trophy, and you've seen it play out no further than in last year's Western Conference Finals. To get swept the way they did, it shows you them going through all that weak competition, but when faced up against real competition, they're nowhere near championship level. So the league definitely in the marketing level are going to have to pivot off of LeBron James.
You've scrapped all that again to go back to East versus West. I know you've said tradition because you're in Indiana, but my suspicion is that if it had all worked to the satisfaction of the league, you guys would have continued those innovations. So what was the rationale behind going back to the old way, if you can say that without using the word tradition, traditional, or any version thereof?
Operating under those rules, we returned to the East versus West format and the 48-minute game format because we thought what we were doing was not working. I think people uniformly were critical of last year's All-Star game and felt it was not a competitive game. And it was not a position held solely by the league. I think the players collectively recognized as well that it wasn't what they wanted to see either.
So right there, you see why they changed the format back to the original All-Star game. Choosing your own teammate was great for television drama to see who got skipped over. But as far as on the court, the 2023 All-Star game was some of the shittiest product you ever seen on television.
They had not put their best foot forward. And I'd say Andre Iguodala now, who is the executive director, former player of the Players Association, I think shares that view with the league office that we're not necessarily looking for players to go out there as if it's, the finals certainly, but we need players to play defense. We need them to care about this game. And the feeling was that maybe, and I'll take responsibility for it, as you know, I used to run something called NBA Entertainment, that we'd gotten carried away a bit with the entertainment aspect. And by that, I'm not just talking about the halftime or the intros per se. One of the things we heard from the players, and I think this goes to the draft, was on one hand, now you're telling us you want us to play this as if it were a real game, but there's nothing about it that feels like a real game. You have us standing up on stage, operating through this draft, then once the intros start, we get cold, we're standing there forever, we don't get to go through our usual routines, then come halftime, you're adding not just a little bit of extra time, but a lot of extra time, so we get cold in the locker rooms. And I think we sat down with the players and we listened to them. We said, all right, we have to return to basketball, back to basketball, so to speak.
That's interesting, the timing of that sit down, because we've seen in quite a few years of just this all-star format. But that timing is not ironic. They knew the television deal was going to be up, and they needed the 2024 All-Star game to be a great product. So when they're pitching themselves in a new TV deal, they could potentially get a similar deal for All-Star weekend, whether it be a Friday, a Saturday night, or even parts of Sunday on streaming exclusively, the same way that NFL did with Wild Card Weekend on Peacock. The NFL got over $100 million just for 1 or 2 games. The NBA could have leveraged All-Star Weekend in a similar fashion.
It's about the game, and that's ultimately how we're going to be judged. I think sometimes when you're in the market for an all-star game and you're having fun at all the events and the parties and all those other things, people often are saying to me, I've been doing this a lot of years, before the game even takes place on Sunday night, it's been a fantastic all-star weekend. And then, of course, if the game is lousy, then you all just doing your jobs and representing what's happening here to the world, the reports are it was a lousy all-star because the game wasn't that exciting. And frankly, fans are able to vote by what they watch too. They have so many options. So the thought was here, we sat down with the players, we said, let's return to a focus on the game of basketball. Let's come pretty close to your typical routine. We still want the opportunity to introduce to fans around the world the all-star roster.
Once again, there's that language, introducing fans to around the world. The NBA now is a global league. They're fully invested into this league being global, and that's where their growth is going to come from. The verbiage is real important. And it's not ironic that, quote unquote, back to basketball is happening this season when TV negotiations are up.
We still want to have a little bit of fun at halftime, but so just add a slight amount of time, and let's see what we get. My sense is it's a combination of discussions that the leadership of the players are having with the All-Stars. I think discussions Joe Dumars is having directly with players, frankly, having Joe Dumars and his credibility in the league office. I think we're going to see a good game tomorrow night.
Now, his last comment right there is very interesting. I think we're going to see a good game tomorrow. Remember, he did a sit down with the players. He got feedback. They kind of tailored the game to being more of a game with the resting in between halftime and the way the game starts. And he was expecting a good product. So you see how important the league was trying to position this All-Star weekend. Not only the game, but just the overall All-Star weekend. From the dunk contest to the skills challenge. This is a global event. This is how they're pitching it to the streaming companies. Most Americans could view the All-Star weekend as like, oh, I'm not really watching it. But Adam Silver is positioning this as a global event. Other people around the world may find this more interesting than we do in the States. And this was a great opportunity for the league to slightly put on a greater All-Star weekend than they did the year before. And they could have leverage on positioning this as a global event to streaming and get a bigger bag out of it. All these things, from the play-in to the in-season tournament to All-Star weekend, these are pieces of real estate to sell to streaming. And just seeing the results of the 2024 All-Star game, it looked like the players had dropped the fucking bag. And you've seen the disappointment from Adam Silver, even when announcing the winners after the game.
And to the Eastern Conference All-Stars, you scored the most points. Well, congratulations.
You could hear the disappointment in Adam Silver's voice completely.
To the Eastern Conference All-Stars, you scored the most points. Well, congratulations.
You know, Silver looked at the players thinking, what the fuck am I supposed to do with that when I pitch it to streaming? The players gave him no breathing room with that type of performance. But once again, even though in the States, we don't really tend to kind of respect the All-Star weekend anymore, globally, this is still an event. So we'll see how the NBA cleverly tries to market the All-Star weekend in a certain way, especially to get a bigger bag and use it as a piece of real estate on streaming. The ace in their pocket is the All-Star weekend is a global event. Peep the language Adam Silver uses when he describes the league's audience throughout this press conference as a global audience.
This year's draft, you guys are moving it to 2 days. What went into that? Was it more teams, that wanted more time in the second round? Or, was it more drawing more interest to the players in the second round and making it a 2-day thing? And are you guys just going to reevaluate the success of this plan and then go forward in the future?
The answer is to begin with your last question, which is, sure, we'll reevaluate after we see how it works. I would say you hit on the two primary reasons. Number one, we did hear from our teams that these second round picks have become increasingly important, and their ability to reset not just to have more time, which we've offered between picks in the second round, going from 2 minutes to 4 minutes, but in addition, the opportunity to reset after the first round of the draft, to reset.
That's interesting. Second round picks are more important, and that's what team GMs are emphasizing. It looks like the fact that the game has opened up on a global market, there's just more talent coming in overall as the pool gets larger. But we also got to factor in, it's much cheaper, especially with the cap going up and you're getting your star players averaging about $60 million a year. Some will be making 70. Them second round picks are going to be really valuable because some of these teams, if they're over the second apron with this new CBA, they're not going to be able to pick up certain guys. They're not going to be able to use certain mid-level exceptions. A lot of teams can't get Spencer Dinwiddie like how the Lakers did this season, or how the Clippers pick up Russell Westbrook. Those type of acquisitions for teams that are over the second apron are not going to be possible. So you're starting to see why these second round picks are going to mean a lot more. But at the end of the day, let's not cap here. The media landscape has expanded, and the NBA is taking a page out of NFL's playbook by making their draft a whole event. And it's going to work. It's going to work. Once again, the media landscape needs content. And yet it's another piece of real estate to sell to streaming services. And not only views are going to be up because people are going to be interested on the new players their team is going to get, we also got to consider the gambling aspect to it. Who's going to get picked? The odds. There's going to be a new audience on top of the global audience that's going to view this event. And then the icing on the cake is something I already said. The new CBA permits it. Those second round two-way contracts are going to be important, especially for teams that have multiple star players or just over a certain apron within the salary cap.
That's what their needs are, and have that day to consider that was something they were very interested in. So that was from the team standpoint. But then from the league standpoint, we were pleased. I mean, in the old days, the draft didn't even used to be in prime time. And we went from prime time on ESPN to prime time on ABC and ESPN. And the feeling was, once I used to do the second round, of course, Mark Tatum is here, deputy commissioner, now does the second round. Sometimes, given the level of interest in this league, it seemed, frankly, a little bit silly that we were standing there at 12:30 a.m. at night calling off names for the second round of our draft. And to the extent that our partner ESPN came to us and said, there is sufficient interest that if you're interested, we think this merits primetime coverage on ESPN. So for us, it was pretty straightforward. I mean, of course, we needed the Players Association agreement to do that. And it wasn't universally popular. There were some people who felt maybe we should just get it all done in one night. But I think for me, I felt sort of combining all those different interests, the opportunity to give that additional exposure to these second round picks, the opportunity to talk about why these picks are so valuable to teams.
And the opportunity to make more money, because this is what it's all fucking about. Let's not cap. You could even look at now the lottery selection. Just the ping pong balls falling the right way has turned into an hour-long event. That's how much starved the media is for content, that they extended the ping pong balls to an hour-long event. You see all the ads that are being ran, and this formula could definitely be duplicated multiple times going into the draft and also now into the second round. Once again, the NBA is pulling a page out of the NFL's playbook.
Teams, how deep the rosters are these days, it seemed to me like a no-brainer. But you never know. We'll get through this first draft, and then I'm sure we'll sit down with the players, we'll sit down with our partners, and see whether it worked.
How do you balance at this point having the respect for the officiating with also the respect for the players and making sure that they feel heard?
Yeah, I'm so sympathetic to both players who feel that an official missed a call, and sometimes they do, and I'm incredibly sympathetic to officials who have some of the hardest job in sports and are under a microscope and occasionally, of course, do miss calls, and we acknowledge when they do.
And the league is also dealing with a new crop of officials. A lot of the baby boomer officials are getting out of the game, and it's looking like the new generation of officials may be more introverted, more triggered by the back and forth with players. So there's a lot of dynamics coming their way. The game definitely has more eyeballs on it. There's more pressure, and you add on gambling as a cherry on top to it all. These guys are under a heavy microscope. And also the consistency. It's to the point now where coaches in their press conferences are outing the refs. The players have always had a history of doing it during their post-game pressers, but the fact that the coaches and just veteran coaches are doing it to the refs, this is almost getting out of hand because it's almost too many fines to keep track of, and it's too many instances of just games being botched. You look at the way the Knicks and the Houston Rockets game ended, that was a bad look for the league. And some of these refs might be feeling the pressure of those 2-minute reports. Maybe there might be too much transparency with the refs, and the transparency should be more internal between the refs and the league.
I think what makes me most frustrated are precisely the issues you're referring to, the communication issues sort of between players and officials. I feel that's an area we should be able to do a better job, both ways. And I put that on the category, as you said, of respect for the game. I'm really encouraged to have Andre Iguodala as a partner to talk about these issues because he's not just a former player, 19 years at the league, multiple championships. He understands the pressure, he understands the issue. And I think there's a real willingness on behalf of the officials as well to do better. So I think this is a real area of focus for us that we're going to be working on. And I think it's easy to say respect for the game. I think people recognize that how players, how the communication works, it's not a typical workplace. It's, we have to take into account the high stress they're under, but it's something that all of us, even if we're not basketball experts, are in a position to judge when we see that dynamic of, and particularly now when so many cameras, so much high fidelity audio, we're able to pick up a lot of what's being said. There just has to be a two-way sense of respect, and I'm sympathetic to the frustration and feel it's an area where we can make progress.
And you could tell some of the pressure is definitely getting to these referees because we're at a point where we're seeing them toss out star players at a rate that we've never seen before. But all these incidents that are taking place with the refs at a time where the league is getting into bed with all these gambling companies, these mishaps are not a good look right now. And it's definitely something the league is going to have to get correct, and they're going to have more parity and more consistency with some of these rules.
Last year, you were touting the amount of teams still in playoff contention and kind of the parity around the league. And then the CBA seemed to try to create more parity by lessening the salary payroll disparity. The league has always seemed to be kind of more boom times when there are dynastic level teams, really good teams for a number of years that kind of lord over the league to some degree. Why did you feel like it's in the league's best interest to try to drive parity at the cost of those kind of outsized teams that seem to be so popular and help the business interests?
Well, I would say it slightly differently. We're not trying to drive parity as much as parity of opportunity. I think in this league, superstar players are still going to win a disproportionate number of championships, and well-managed franchises are still going to win a disproportionate number of franchises. Where I thought it wasn't good for the game and it wasn't good for the league, that there was no question that there's a correlation between spending and the quality of the team.
Now, everyone tends to look at the Golden State Warriors when it comes to this, especially the 2017, 2018 Golden State Warriors with Kevin Durant. And if you take a step back and just look at things in proper context, the Warriors drafted all their players. They signed their superstar Stephen Curry to an early extension, getting him at a discount. And the only free agent they really went after is Kevin Durant. I mean, that franchise, I've never seen perfect luck and perfect timing. With the cap going up, with Kevin Durant being available, with them signing Steph early, especially because he had ankle issues early on in his career, all those things fell into place. And sometimes the narrative tends to get out of hand, like the Warriors purchased this all-star dynasty team, when in reality, they drafted and developed all their guys. They may have gotten a few pieces like Andre Iguodala, and the only free agent they really went after was Kevin Durant. But the only thing about the Warriors, I would say, is that they extended their roster being expensive by doing a sign and trade with Kevin Durant, sending him to Brooklyn and maintaining a high salary spot in their roster with D'Angelo Russell. Thus, it allowed them to actually leverage that and get guys like Andrew Wiggins on the team. So them being able to maintain that was actually a result of them capitalizing off their roster the way it was currently constructed going into the 2017 offseason, and just naturally the NBA cap jumping up. But they should not be counted as one of these teams that purchased the all-star roster. A team we could really look at is the Clippers. They went out and bought all their guys. There's no homegrown talent within that team. But the league having parity is a good thing, as more teams tend to be in the mix, thus keeping the interest up throughout the many fan bases similar to the NFL. But there's going to be some unintended consequences as we're seeing it play out early on with this new CBA, where we see the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Cleveland Cavaliers have some tough decisions to make entering the 2024 offseason. So the league rules was really designed to punish the Warriors and the Clippers, but now we're seeing just in the very beginning phases that it's going to end up punishing teams like the Timberwolves and the Cleveland Cavaliers, as they're going to have some tough choices to make entering their offseason.
And that while I understand that dynasties are something that fans will get behind, at the same time what you hear from fans is they want those teams to be created the right way. And so people aren't that interested in seeing teams buy championships, so to speak. And so we felt by leveling the playing field, so by creating more parity in terms of opportunity, that would help us continue on that continuum towards a more competitive 30-team league. And if you look back over the last at least 2 decades in this league through successive collective bargaining agreements, I think we've made progress. And incidentally, I'll just add that this is not just a league interest. I think it's a player one too, because if there's going to be a draft, who wants to get drafted to a team that has a significant disadvantage because of the size of their market and their opportunity to generate revenue? And I'll just lastly say, look no further than the NFL. I mean, we're a very different league, different number of games, different impact of star players, but I marvel at the job they've done in terms of creating a truly competitive league where you hardly ever hear discussions about market size. And I'll just add, I use Victor Wembanyama as an example.
Once again, that's acknowledgement of the NFL blueprint. And when you look at it, that NFL blueprint is gold. That is liquid gold. You want your league to kind of represent the same sort of parity, the same sort of fan engagement as the NFL.
I think that for people who've been covering the league for a while, certainly 20 years ago, probably even 10 years ago, if a transcendent player like Victor Wembanyama were drafted were the first pick in the draft and he'd gone to a small market, people would have said, oh, that's too bad. He's not going to have the same economic opportunity, or not as many people are going to see him. Nobody says that now. He goes to San Antonio and people say, opportunity to play under Coach Pop, R.C. Buford with his experience, San Antonio organization experience with big men and international players. And I think Victor feels the same way. In a digital world, that every game is available on a smartphone everywhere in the world. And so I think given that in the long term, both competitive and business interests of the league, we're better off having a league where there's more competitive fairness and opportunity among all the teams in the league.
And Silver is also going to have to address the tanking. That shit is a bad look for the league. They should sort of make it in a way where if you get a top 5 pick the following season, you cannot get a top 5 pick again. You could get something outside of that. Because that culture that came from Sam Hinkie and the Philadelphia 76ers, where they branded losing, which is almost the polar opposite of what sports culture is about, that shit was a bad fucking look for the league. And it always shocks me, even to this day, that an East Coast hard-nosed kind of blue-collar city like Philly would accept that losing as a form of branding. It's beyond me.
This is year 4 now for the G League Ignite, and I believe they're 2-19 this season. I'm curious kind of what's been the overall evaluation as you're...
Damn, that G League Ignite, that program is not looking good.
As you guys entered into this sort of academy process with Ignite, and as image and likeness money only increases in amateur sports, what's sort of the NBA's appetite to kind of keep up with the Joneses, I guess, on that front?
It's an important question, I think, where we're going in terms of youth basketball. At the time that we formed Team Ignite, I think I was very public about the fact that I favored going to a minimum age of 18 instead of 19.
Which makes sense, but the culture and the way these young players are being developed in AAU, elite overtime, all this highlight culture that exists, it doesn't really translate into the NBA. You got young kids now playing in leagues where they're pointing at cameras. Everyone has a highlight reel. There's grown adults that have full-time jobs just recording these guys and being the cameraman. That's the cool thing. This shit is weird. Everything about the amateur circuit is really about just winning, maintaining your sponsorships, and flying in the most athletic players from different parts of the region to play for 2 to 3 teams in the same fucking tournament. So accepting 18-year-olds coming into the league, it might not be the best thing when you see the culture that they're coming from.
As we sat down with our players to discuss that, and then essentially the college market changed, the introduction of collectives, NIL, the transfer portal, a lot changed around us. And then we came to a consensus when we sat down with the players and our teams that we were better off staying at 19. And I'd say also some of the societal concerns that were driving us to move to 18, that there seemed to be an unfairness that these players, even at the highest level, couldn't earn a living in college basketball.
Silver has one hell of a poker face, especially with his words, man. At the end of the day, a lot of corruption was going on in the NCAA. A lot of schools were getting caught paying people under the table. And the headlines will always read, current NBA player got caught up in such and such scandal with his college team. And from a PR standpoint, it always tied in the NBA somehow, even though they weren't involved. It became glaring when you seen the large contract amounts that ESPN was paying to host some of these games, and so many schools were caught giving money underneath the table. It just became a total clusterfuck. And the NBA did not want to expose themselves to that sort of branding on some of the brand new players coming into the league.
And we, the league and the Player Association together, were preventing them from doing that. I think sort of that dissipated because all of a sudden this great economic opportunity presented itself through these various programs at college. I think given that that's happened, I think we are in the process of reassessing Team Ignite, because now some of those same players who didn't want to be one-and-done players because they felt it was unfair and they wanted the ability not just to earn a living playing basketball, but to do commercial deals that weren't available to them at college, to hire professional agents, and an opportunity that wasn't available to them at college. They now, all of those same opportunities have become available to them.
Come on, Silver, you said everything that benefited the players except what they really want. They want to get into the NBA. Silver is framing this like the players just wanted to make money. No, they wanted to get into the fucking league. And we've seen with the most talented players on the highest level coming out of Ignite, guys like Scoot Henderson, Jalen Green, Jonathan Kuminga, they all have entered into the league and there really hasn't been much of an impact. And those are the high-end players coming out of the Ignite program. But when we start going down the tier, you look at Dante Daniels out in New Orleans, 8th overall pick. He's a great defender, but there's no real impact. 6 points per game coming off the bench, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, and he can't really shoot. He shoots average from the field and also 25% from 3. So the impact has been very minimal for guys coming out of there. You can also look at Jaden Hardy. He had multiple scholarship offers to D1 schools. Then he opted out to Ignite. He fell out of the first round to the 37th pick, and now he's backing up Luka and he just gets 15 minutes a game, even though he has flashes here and there, but he has yet to make an impact. And we're seeing a growing trend where players who denied multiple Division I scholarships and joined Ignite sort of get stuck in this purgatory of just being in between the G League and the NBA with no path forward. You could look at Isaiah Todd. He's been playing for G League Ignite for 3 years, and when he had his moment to play for the Washington Wizards, a team that was already a losing team, he had very little impact. He shot 22% from the field and 19% from 3, averaging 1 point per game and 1 rebound. And this is a guy with multiple Division I scholarship offers and an all McDonald's American. And this outcome just does not happen for the American players. A lot of international players have joined Ignite only to end up going back to their country and playing for local teams. But the reason why players join Ignite is to make it into the NBA, which is the only thing Adam Silver in his press conference did not state. But making the NBA is a much more difficult path than most of these players coming up think. It's still a league of basketball players who are 1%ers of all basketball players in the world, even guys that are on the bench. And legendary players like LeBron James, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, or any other Hall of Famer, they're almost 0.0001% of that 1%. That's how hard it is to make it in the league. And unfortunately for G League Ignite, if the players don't make it into the league, there's no other pathway for them but to remain in purgatory. And it's not a good look for Adam Silver and the NBA if they have all these young guys who are all McDonald's American players and who have multiple Division I scholarships to have no other alternative route. Because had they taken their scholarship offers and went to college, at least they had another pathway of making something for themselves. So Silver, speaking on the beginning phases of ending that program, is also reevaluating this league because it looks bad from a PR perspective. You got a bunch of young kids who had a chance to go to college. Now they're stuck in NBA purgatory while chasing a dream almost endlessly and making average salary money. So just like how the NBA take credit for guys coming up and getting developed and making it into the league, they're gonna have to take credit for the guys who don't. And man, Jalen Green, Scoot Henderson, Jonathan Kuminga, Dyson Daniels, they really haven't had that much impact into the league. And those are the top prospects coming out of Ignite. So you can only imagine the players that are tiers below them. And even though the NBA had unlimited resources to make Ignite a more developmental program, they still somewhat followed the same formula of AAU and other youth basketball programs by not emphasizing winning. These kids are just playing in a bunch of games where they just have to showcase themselves. So G League Ignite in a way is almost a glorified overtime / AAU / EYBL league. The only difference is that they have NBA affiliations. Evaluations on what type of development approach they should take definitely should be reconsidered. A very insightful press conference with Adam Silver. Media members asked a lot of great questions. And Adam Silver kept a great poker face. The wording was very well crafted. And there's definitely a lot of things the league has sitting on their table that they need to address. Silver is doing a hell of a job so far. Rome definitely was not built in a day. Until next time, you fellas stay safe. Peace.